Chapter 1. The Unwilling Tourist. The last thing Luke Glanton remembered was the overwhelming smell of burnt popcorn and the frantic, two-fingered stabbing at his keyboard. His online avatar, a hulking barbarian named Gronk the Unflinching, had been cornered by a swarm of cave gremlins. In a desperate, rage-fueled moment, he had slammed his palm down on his malfunctioning desk lamp, the one with the finicky brass base his grandfather had left him. A shower of blue-white sparks erupted, not from the lamp, but from the air itself. The world didn't fade to black. It was more like it was violently yanked away, replaced by a nauseating vortex of color and sound that felt like being flushed down the universe's toilet. He landed with a soggy, undignified thump in mud that smelled of decay and things he didn't want to think about. Oof, the word was a weak puff of air. He lay there for a long moment, the wind knocked out of him, staring up at a canopy of leaves so dense they turned the world a twilight green. The air was thick, humid, and alive with the chittering, buzzing, and roaring of 1,000 unseen creatures. It was nothing like the controlled, sterile quiet of his bedroom. Okay, he thought, his brain struggling to reboot. This is a very, very vivid dream. Probably from eating that questionable gas station sushi. He pushed himself up, his jeans and hoodie instantly soaked through with mud. His glasses were askew. He fixed them, and the nightmare came into sharp focus. Towering, gnarled trees with bark like tortured faces stretched towards a sky he could only glimpse in slivers. Vines as thick as his arm hung like nooses. The ground was a treacherous carpet of roots, moss, and suspiciously large mushrooms that pulsed with a faint sickly SCENC that this was not New Jersey. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of his neck. He was an introvert to his core. His idea of an adventure was trying a new flavor of instant ramen. This was a sensory overload of terrifying proportions. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice swallowed by the oppressive jungle. "Is anyone there?" A branch snapped to his left. Luke froze, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He slowly turned his head. Two creatures emerged from behind a giant flytrap-like plant. They were about 3 feet tall, with skin the color and texture of old snot. Their ears were large and bat-like, their eyes glowing like red embers in the gloom. They were dressed in crude leather scraps and wielding jagged, rusty knives. They looked exactly like the cave gremlins he'd just been fighting in Realm of Mythos. One of them sniffed the air, its wide nostrils flaring. "Knack, smell that? Smells like not goblin." The other one, Knack presumably, grunted. "Smells soft, tender, good eating, Blurg." Luke's brain short-circuited. They were talking. They were talking about eating him. Blurg took a step closer, a rope made of woven vines in his grubby hands. "For the stew pot? The boss will be pleased." New flavor. That was the cue. The fight-or-flight instinct, which for Luke was usually freeze and then flee, finally kicked into high gear. He turned to run, but his foot caught on a root. He went down hard, his glasses flying off into a patch of glowing mushrooms. The world became a blurry, terrifying impressionism painting. He felt rough hands grabbing him, the scratch of rope binding his wrists. He was hoisted up, the two goblins chattering excitedly about the menu possibilities. "Maybe roast him," Knack suggested. "Nah, stew is best for soft ones," Blurg argued. "Makes him tender." As they dragged his blurry form deeper into the jungle, Luke's mind raced. This was not a dream. The smell was too real, the bite of the rope too sharp. He had teleported. He, Luke Glanton, an 18-year-old who considered a successful social interaction to be ordering a pizza without stuttering, was now a prisoner of goblins in a medieval nightmare. The horror was absolute, and it was underscored by a profound, crushing sense of irony. Chapter 2. A Princess and a Pile of Rags. The goblin camp was a testament to filth and disorganization. It was a clearing littered with crude lean-tos, piles of bones, and a large, bubbling cauldron that gave off a smell that made the jungle seem fragrant by comparison. Luke, now blind as a bat without his glasses, was thrown unceremoniously into a wooden cage that stank of fear and damp wood. He landed on something soft that let out a very undignified oof. Hey, watch it, you oaf. This is genuine satin you're crushing. The voice was sharp, clear, and dripping with a sarcasm so potent it could strip paint. Luke scrambled off, his bound hands making the process awkward. He squinted. Next to him was a blur of vibrant color, gold and blue, he thought. Who are you? He stammered. The crown Princess Esra of Eldoria, the blur said, her tone implying this should be obvious. And you are? A particularly grubby peasant? A failed jester? Did they capture you for your fashion sense? Because if so, it was a mercy. Luke blinked. I'm Luke Glanton. I'm from ... elsewhere? Esra shifted and he could make out the regal tilt of her head. Fascinating. Well, welcome to Elsewhere, Luke from Elsewhere. The accommodations are dreadful, the service is appalling, and the other guests are trying to eat us. I'd ask for a refund. Despite the terror, a small, hysterical laugh bubbled in Luke's throat. He swallowed it. They're really going to eat us? That's the general consensus. They've been arguing about seasoning for the past hour. One of them, I believe his name is Snotgob, is a staunch advocate for just a pinch of bog time, while the other, Fester, thinks it's all about the slow simmer. It's been a riveting debate, really. Almost takes your mind off the impending doom. Luke fell silent, processing this. He was in a cage with a sarcastic princess about to be the main course in a goblin stew. His life had taken a very strange turn. Your glasses, Esra said, her tone shifting from sarcastic to observational. You can't see, can you? No, Luke admitted, feeling a fresh wave of helplessness. They fell off when they caught me. Unfortunate. A blind savior is not exactly the fairy tale trope I was hoping for. Savior? Well, you're not here for the stew, are you? You must have a plan. A daring rescue? A hidden army waiting in the wings? Please tell me you have a hidden army. Or at the very least, a moderately sharp stick. Luke shook his head, then realized she could probably see the gesture. No plan. No army. I just appeared here. Princess Esra let out a long, dramatic sigh. Of course. I get captured by the one person in the realm who is even more hopeless than I am at the moment. Wonderful. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the goblins' raucous arguing. Luke's mind, however, was starting to work. He was shy, not stupid. He was a problem solver by nature. It's why he was good at coding and complex games. This was just another problem. A horrifying life or death problem, but a problem nonetheless. He started cataloging what he had. His hoodie, his jeans, his sneakers. The contents of his pockets. A half-eaten packet of fruit gummies. His wallet, useless. His phone, no signal, 2% battery. And the multi-tool his dad had given him for being prepared. He'd never used it for anything more complex than opening a package, but it had a knife, a saw, and pliers. Hope, small and fragile, sparked in his chest. Esra, he whispered, I have an idea, but I need your help. Finally, some initiative. What is it? Are we tunneling to freedom? Summoning a dragon? Please let it involve a dragon. Nothing that exciting, Luke said, fumbling with his bound hands to get the multi-tool from his front pocket. I need you to see if you can get this out of my pocket. It's a small metal thing, with a great deal of shuffling and whispered instructions. My left. No, your other left. By the gods, are all men from elsewhere this spatially challenged? Esra managed to retrieve the multi-tool. What is this peculiar contraption? She asked, her fingers tracing the various tools. It's a tool. There's a small knife on it. Can you open it and cut my ropes? More fumbling. Then he felt a sawing motion at his wrists. After a minute of tense work, the ropes fell away. He brought his hands in front of him, rubbing his raw wrists. He took the multi-tool from her and, with practiced ease, opened the small, sharp blade. Okay, he breathed, his confidence growing by a fraction. Now for the cage. He felt around the crude wooden bars until he found the knot of vine holding the door shut. He began to saw at it. It was slow, tedious work, and every snap of a twig or raised goblin voice made him jump, Could you hurry it up? Esra hissed. Snotgob just looked over here and licked his lips. It was deeply unsettling. I'm going as fast as I can, Luke whispered back, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, with a soft snap, the last strand of the tough vine gave way. The cage door creaked open an inch. Freedom! Esra whispered triumphantly. At that exact moment, a portly goblin named Fester, who had been championing the slow simmer method, decided to check on the main ingredients. His beady red eyes widened. Hey, the meat is escaping. The camp erupted into chaos. Go! Luke yelled, shoving the now open multi-tool into his pocket. He grabbed Ezra's hand. Her skin was surprisingly soft, and pulled her out of the cage. Wait. My slipper? She cried, trying to reach back for a bejeweled shoe. Leave it! Luke shouted, his blurry vision focused on the dark line of the jungle. They stumbled into the trees just as a dozen angry goblins, armed with knives, clubs, and one very rusty frying pan, gave chase. Chapter 3. An Unlikely Alliance and a Grumpy Guide. The chase was a blur of panic, tripping, and Ezra's running commentary. Left. Left, you fool? There's a... Oh, never mind. You found the bramble patch the hard way. Are they gaining? I can't tell. I'm too busy not being Stu. By the Seven Kingdoms, do they ever tire? It's terribly poor sportsmanship. Luke, running half-blind with the sarcastic princess in tow, felt a strange sort of clarity descend upon him. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now accompanied by a fierce protective instinct. He might be shy, he might be out of his element, but he would not let these disgusting creatures have her. He spotted a narrow gap between two massive, twisted tree trunks. This way, he grunted, pulling her towards it. They squeezed through just as the lead goblins reached them. The gap was too small for the goblins to follow easily, buying them precious seconds. They ran until their lungs burned, and the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, eventually fading away altogether. They collapsed, panting, at the base of a giant, weeping willow-like tree whose leaves shimmered with silver light. Well, Esra said between gasps. That was ... invigorating. I hadn't run that much since I was 8 and tried to escape my etiquette lessons. She looked at Luke, who was leaning against the tree, his face pale and streaked with dirt. You're surprisingly resilient for a soft boy from elsewhere. Thanks, Luke wheezed. I think... Don't let it go to your head. You still look like a drowned rat. She paused, her tone softening a fraction. But, thank you. For the not being Stu part. Luke just nodded, too exhausted to form words. He patted his pockets, his heart sinking. His phone was gone, probably lost in the mad dash. The fruit gummies, however, had survived. He pulled out the crumpled packet. Here, he said, offering her one. It's not much, but it's sugar. Esra took the small, gelatinous bear with suspicion. What sorcery is this? It's soda ... vibrantly red. It's a strawberry. Just eat it. She popped it into her mouth. Her eyes went wide. By the gods. It's delicious. What manner of berry is this? It's like summer and Joy had a child. Luke managed a small smile. They're just gummies. He ate one himself, the familiar taste a tiny, comforting anchor to his old life. As they caught their breath, they realized their predicament was far from over. They were lost in a deadly jungle, with no food, no water, and a tribe of hungry goblins likely still searching for them. We need to get to my father's castle, Esra stated. It lies to the east, beyond the Whispering Woods and the Serpent Spine Mountains. Right, east, Luke said, squinting at the blurry green canopy. Any landmarks? A handy "You Are Here" map carved into a tree. Don't be clever, it doesn't suit you, Esra retorted, but there was no malice in it. We need a guide. Someone who knows these woods? And where do we find one of those? As if on cue, there was a rustle in the bushes. Luke immediately stood, putting himself between Esra and the noise. The tiny knife on his multi-tool held out in a pathetic but brave gesture. A figure emerged. It was a dwarf, about 4 feet tall, with a magnificent, braided red beard that reached his belt, in armor that looked like it had been through a rock slide and lost. He had a battle axe strapped to his back and a perpetual scowl on his face. "Who's macking all that racket?" The dwarf grumbled, his voice like grinding gravel. "Scarring off all the good game. I was this close to bagging a prismatic pheasant." Esra stepped forward, brushing the dirt from her dress. "Well met, stout warrior. I am Princess Esra of Eldoria. We require your assistance." The dwarf squinted at her. "A princess, eh? And a blind one-eyed giant?" he added, nodding at Luke, who was still squinting myopically. "He is not blind. He is from elsewhere," Esra explained, as if that clarified everything. The dwarf just grunted. "Name's Boren Barrelhelm, and I don't do assistance for free. What's in it for me? We can offer you ... Esra began, then trailed off. She had nothing. Luke, thinking quickly, held up the half-empty packet of fruit gummies. "We have these." Boren's eyes locked onto the brightly colored candies. He sniffed the air. What arcane delight is that?" "It smells of ... happiness." "Try one," Luke said, tossing him a green one. Boren caught it, examined it with the intensity of a master jeweler, and then popped it into his mouth. His stern, grumpy expression melted into one of pure, childlike wonder. "By my ancestors' forged beards ... He whispered. It's lime. We need to get to Castle Eldoria," Luke said. "The whole packet is yours if you guide us." Boren stared at the packet, a war raging behind his eyes between dwarf stubbornness and sugarlust. "Sugarlust one, fine," he barked, snatching the packet from Luke's hand. "But I'm only talking you to the edge of the Whispering Woods. After that, you're on your own. And there'll be no refunds if you get eaten by a grumble-tooth or charmed to death by a will-o'-the-wisp. Now stop standing around like startled deer. We move, now." And with that, their party of 3 was formed: a sarcastic princess, a shy boy from another world, and a grumpy dwarf motivated entirely by fruit snacks. Chapter 4: The Whispering Woods and a Talking Squirrel. Journey with Boren was ... educational. "Don't step on the purple moss," the dwarf would grunt. "It screams." "Annoying. That stream? Looks clear, right? Full of teeth fish. They'll clean a skeleton in 10 seconds flat. See that pretty glowing flower? It spits a neurotoxin that makes you dance yourself to death. Nasty business." Luke listened intently, his mind filing away every piece of information. It was like a brutal real-time strategy game. Esra, however, seemed to view it as a guided tour. "So, Boren, what's the political structure of the local goblin tribes? Are they a monarchy or more of a loose-knit anarcho-syndicalist commune?" Boren just glared at her. "They're pests. They bite." End of lesson. They reached the edge of the Whispering Woods as dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and orange. The trees here were ancient and pale, their leaves seeming to tremble even when there was no wind. A soft, collective murmur seemed to emanate from the forest itself. "This is as far as I go," Boren announced, clutching his precious fruit gummies. "The woods don't like dwarves. Says we're too dense-headed and stomp too much. Rude, if you ask me." "Thank you, Boren," Luke said sincerely. "Don't mention it, ever." The dwarf turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. Don't answer the trees. And whatever you do, don't trust the squirrels." And with that cryptic warning, he stomped off back into the jungle. "Well, he was a ray of sunshine," Esra remarked. Luke took a deep breath. "Okay, Whispering Woods, how bad can it be?" As soon as they stepped beneath the pale canopy, the whispers grew louder. They weren't in any language Luke could understand, but they were insidious, tugging at the corners of his mind. ... lost ... So lost ... The princess will be the death of you ... done back. Your world is gone ... Luke shook his head, trying to clear it. Esra, however, seemed unaffected. "Oh, hush you," she said to a particular gnarled oak. "My hair is not a bird's nest. It's called windswept elegance." They walked for an hour, the whispers a constant, maddening companion. The path was confusing, seeming to shift and change behind them. I think we're going in circles, Luke said, his frustration mounting. I swear I saw that rock with the face 3 times. Don't be silly, Esra said. Rocks don't have. Oh, wait. That one does look a bit like Uncle Fergal. Nose and everything. Just as Luke was about to suggest they try climbing a tree for a better view, a flash of russet fur shot down a trunk and landed on a branch right in front of them. It was a squirrel, but unlike any squirrel Luke had ever seen. It wore a tiny acorn cap helmet and had an impossibly smug expression. Halt. The squirrel squeaked, putting its paws on its hips. You are trespassing in the domain of Baron Nutkin III, guardian of the Glimmernuts. State your business. Luke and Esra stared, dumbfounded. We're just passing through, Luke managed. We need to get to the serpent's spine. The squirrel stroked its chin with a tiny paw. A quest? How delightfully dramatic. The pass through the mountains is treacherous, filled with screeching cliff terrors and the dreaded, soul-sucking bog of eternal Mopes. You'll never make it without my help. And what, pray tell, is your price, Baron? Esra asked, folding her arms. Information. The squirrel chirped. I am a collector of gossip, of secrets, of the juiciest tidbits. Tell me a secret the forest does not know, and I shall grant you safe passage and the true path. Luke's mind went blank. A secret? What could he say? That he was from another world? That seemed like a big one. Esra, however, leaned forward conspiratorially. Very well, Baron, a secret. The Queen of Summerdale, Lady Marigold. She wears a wig. A terrible one. Made from bob ponytail hair. It's a whole scandal. The squirrel's eyes gleamed. Oh, delicious. Truly succulent. The path is yours. Follow the butterflies with wings like stained glass. They are my agents. They will not lead you astray. Toodle-o-o. And with that, the squirrel zipped back up the tree, chattering excitedly to itself about wigs. Luke looked at Esra, impressed. How did you know that? She shrugged. I didn't. I made it up. But have you seen Lady Marigold's hair? It was a plausible lie. True to the Baron's word, a small cloud of butterflies with iridescent, stained glass wings appeared and began to flit ahead of them, lighting their way through the increasingly dark woods. The whispers seemed to recede as if disappointed. For the first time since they'd entered the woods, Luke felt a glimmer of hope. He looked at Esra, who was smiling triumphantly, her face illuminated by the soft, magical light of the butterflies. In that moment, covered in dirt, missing a slipper, and trailed by magical insects, she looked more like a real person and less like a storybook character. He felt a strange, warm flutter in his chest, which he quickly attributed to hunger and exhaustion. Chapter 5. The Bog of Eternal. Mopes and a moment of horror, the butterflies led them safely out of the whispering woods just as the moon rose. A pale, pockmarked sentinel in the sky. Before them lay a vast, mist-shrouded bog. The air was cold and still, and a profound, gloomy silence hung over everything. This was the Bog of Eternal Mopes. The Baron wasn't kidding, Luke whispered, the silence feeling heavier than any noise. It's cheery, Esra said, her sarcasm sounding forced. They picked their way carefully across a series of semi-solid hummocks and crumbling peat bridges. The mist curled around their ankles like cold, damp fingers. The only sound was the squelch of their feet and the occasional distant, gurgling sob. Did you hear that? Luke asked, his hand instinctively going to his multi-tool. It's just the bog, Esra said, but she moved a little closer to him. They had gone about halfway across when the horror began. Pale, wraith-like figures began to rise from the murky water. They were translucent and featureless, except for their mouths, which were turned down in expressions of profound misery. They were the Mopes, the lost souls of those who had succumbed to despair in the bog. One of them drifted towards Luke, letting out a low, mournful wail. Why bother? You'll never find your way home. You're just a shy boy pretending to be brave. She never see you as anything more than a useful oaf. The words hit Luke like physical blows, echoing his deepest insecurities. A cold numbness began to seep into his bones. What was the point? He was never going back. This world was too big, too dangerous. Another mope floated towards Esra. Your father is probably already naming a new heir. They all think you're dead. They're probably relieved. No more sarcastic, troublesome princess to worry about. Ezra's confident posture slumped. Her lower lip trembled. They wouldn't. The Mopes closed in, their collective despair forming a psychic weight that threatened to crush them. Luke felt tears welling in his eyes. He wanted to lie down in the mud and just give up. But then he looked at Esra. He saw the light in her eyes, the fire that her sarcasm usually fueled, flickering and dying. The sight of her breaking was more terrifying than any goblin or whispering wood. No. The thought was quiet but firm. He was Luke Glanton. He was from a world with the internet and pizza delivery. He would not be defeated by soggy, depressed ghosts. He straightened up, ignoring the cold dread in his heart. He turned to the mope that was tormenting Esra. "Hey," he shouted, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "Leave her alone." The Mopes paused, their wailing faltering for a second. "You're wrong about her," Luke continued, his voice gaining strength. "She's brave and she's clever and she's amazing. And we are going to make it. Now get lost." He didn't have a weapon for him. He didn't have magic. But he had defiance. He took Ezra's hand. Her fingers were ice cold, but she gripped his tightly. "Luke, ... quote," she whispered. "Don't listen to them," he said, his gaze locked with hers. "They're just bullies. Misery loves company." He started walking, pulling her along, deliberately stepping through the mopes. As he did, they dissipated like smoke, their mournful cries turning to frustrated hisses. Their power was in despair. In the face of genuine courage and connection, they were nothing. They marched the rest of the way across the bog, hand in hand, not saying a word. The mopes did not bother them again. When they finally reached solid ground on the other side, they collapsed, shivering under the shelter of a rocky overhang. The night was cold, and they had no fire. "You were very brave back there," Esra said softly, her voice devoid of its usual sarcastic edge. "You too," Luke said, his cheeks heating up. She was sitting close to him, their shoulders touching for warmth. In the moonlight, he could see her face clearly. The dirt smudges, the stray hairs, the tired but intelligent eyes. "She was beautiful." "Luke," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you say that? That I was amazing?" Luke's heart began to pound. This was it. This was the moment his shyness usually choked him into silence. He looked down at his hands, then forced himself to look back at her. "Because it's true," he said, the words feeling foreign and brave on his tongue. He saw her smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that made his stomach do a somersault. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're not so bad yourself, Luke from elsewhere." They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars appear in the patch of sky visible from their shelter. For the first time, the horror of their situation was overshadowed by a new, terrifying, and wonderful feeling. Luke, however, was too shy to put a name to it. And Esra, for once, was too content to talk. Chapter 6. The Cliff Terrors and a Confession. The Serpent Spine Mountains were a jagged wall of gray stone, their peaks lost in cloud. The only pass, according to Baron Nutking, was a narrow, winding trail littered with loose scree. And it was guarded by the cliff terrors. They were not large creatures, about the size of turkeys, but they were hideous. They had leathery wings, beaks filled with needle-sharp teeth, and a cry that was a perfect mimic of their prey's greatest fears. As Luke and Esra began their ascent, the first terror swooped down. "UK," it shrieked in his mother's voice. "Where are you? The police are here. Please come home." The sound was so accurate, so full of real anguish, that Luke stumbled, his heart clenching. Another one mimicked the sound of his classroom bully, laughing cruelly. A third took on Ezra's father's voice, booming, "Esra, your recklessness has cost the kingdom dearly. You are a disappointment." It was psychological warfare. They clung to the cliff face, covering their ears as the awful sounds echoed around them. "Ignore them," Esra yelled over the din. "They're just echoes." but it was hard. The voices picked at old wounds and fresh fears. Luke felt the familiar urge to retreat, to hide. But then he saw Esra, her face set in a mask of determination, pressing on. He thought of the bog. He thought of her head on his shoulder. He took a deep breath and kept climbing. One of the terrors, frustrated that its mimic taunts weren't working, decided on a more direct approach. It dove at Esra, its claws extended, aiming for her eyes. Luke didn't think. He acted. He shoved Esra against the cliff wall, putting his own body between her and the creature. The terror's claws scraped on his back, tearing through his hoodie and drawing stinging lines of blood. "Luke!" Esra cried out. He gritted his teeth against the pain. "I'm okay. Keep moving." The sight of blood seemed to excite the terrors, and they began to swarm more aggressively. They were getting overwhelmed. "We need a distraction." Luke shouted. Isari, single quotes, as eyes darted around, then lit up. She pointed to a large, precariously balanced boulder further up the path. "That, can we loosen that?" Fighting off diving terrors, they scrambled to the boulder. Luke, using all his strength, and Esra, leveraging a long piece of scree, managed to pry it loose. With a great groaning sound, it tipped over the edge and went crashing down the mountainside, taking a dozen shrieking cliff terrors with it. The rest of the flock, startled by the noise and the loss of their comrades, scattered. Silence returned to the pass. Broken only by their heavy panting, they found a small cave to rest in and tend to Luke's wounds. Esra used a strip of fabric from her already tattered dress to clean the claw marks. "You saved me," she said quietly, her fingers gentle on his back. "It was nothing," Luke mumbled, his face burning. "It wasn't nothing." She finished tying the makeshift bandage and came around to face him. Her expression was serious, her eyes searching his. "Luke, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, his breath catching in his throat. "All my life," she began, "I've been surrounded by knights and nobles and suitors. They were all brave or handsome or said all the right things. But it was all for my title. You're different. You're brave, but you don't even seem to know it. You're kind. You shared your lost fruit gummy. You faced down Mopes and cliff terrors for me. And you look at me like I'm a person, not a princess." She took a step closer. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Luke Glanton." The world stopped. The mountain, the pain, the fear, it all faded away. The most incredible girl he had ever met had just said the words he never dared to hope for. And Luke, the shy introvert, was struck utterly dumb. His mind was a screaming void. 1,000 responses fought for dominance. "I think I'm falling for you too. You're the most amazing person I've ever met. Your sarcasm is my favorite thing in any world." But all that came out was a strangled, high-pitched, Ezra's hopeful expression faltered. A flicker of hurt crossed her face, quickly masked by her old defensive sarcasm. "Right, well, don't strain yourself," with a lengthy reply. She turned away, her shoulders stiff. "We should keep moving. The castle can't be far now." She walked out of the cave, leaving Luke sitting there, alone with his regret. The words, "I love you too," stuck in his throat like a stone. Chapter 7. The Siege and the Spark. The sight of Castle Eldoria, nestled in the valley below, should have been a moment of pure triumph. But for Luke and Esra, a cold silence had settled between them. They walked the last few miles without speaking, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As they drew closer, however, they realized something was wrong. The castle walls were scarred and blackened. Siege engines, crude goblin contraptions littered the field outside the main gates. A large, ragged banner featuring a crudely drawn, drooling mouth flew from a nearby watchtower. The goblin tribe that had captured them hadn't given up. They had followed their scent and laid siege to the castle. "The audacity!" Esra gasped, her personal woes forgotten in face of this new crisis. "They're attacking my home." They crept closer, using the cover of the trampled fields to reach a small, hidden postern gate that Esra knew of. It was unguarded. The goblins were all focused on the main assault, trying to batter down the great gates with a giant log. "We have to get inside," Esra said. We can warn them, help coordinate the defense. Luke nodded, his mind already shifting back into problem-solving mode. The horror of the situation was acute, the screams from the walls, the smell of smoke, the guttural roars of the goblins. But it was a clear problem. Defend the castle. They slipped through the postern gate and into the chaotic courtyard. Soldiers ran to and fro, archers lined the walls, and the air was thick with tension. "Princess!" A grizzled captain cried out, spotting them. "You're alive. Thank the heavens." "Briefly, unless we do something about that," Esra said, pointing to the shuddering main gates. "Report, Captain." "The gates won't hold much longer, Your Highness. Their numbers are overwhelming. We're low on oil and our arrows are running out." Luke looked around. He saw the fear on the soldiers' faces. He saw the desperation. He saw the giant, stupid goblin war chief, a massive brute named Gnarl, bellowing orders from the back of a mangy warg. This was it. The final boss, and he had an idea. A stupid, crazy, potentially brilliant idea from another world. "Captain," Luke said, his voice surprisingly steady, "do you have any alcohol? The strong kind? And clean rags? And a bow and arrow?" The captain looked at him as if he were mad. "Who is this princess?" "A friend," Esra said without hesitation, her eyes on Luke. "Do as he says, now." While the soldiers scrambled to gather the materials, Luke explained his plan to Esra in a hurried whisper. "We need to make Molotov cocktails. We put the alcohol in bottles, stick a rag in as a fuse, light it, and shoot it at their siege engines. Or the chief. The fire will cause chaos." Ezra's eyes widened. "Fire from a bottle? Is this common elsewhere?" "Only in action movies and... never mind. Just trust me." They worked quickly, assembling a dozen crude firebombs. Luke, with his limited vision, knew he couldn't make the shot. "I can't see well enough to aim," he admitted. Isore grabbed a bow from a nearby rack. "I can." She had been trained in archery since she was a child. She notched an arrow, and a soldier let the rag fuse on the bottle tied behind the arrowhead. She took aim at the giant battering ram, her form perfect. "Let's give them a new flavor," she muttered, and let the arrow fly dot soared in a graceful arc and smashed directly into the log. The bottle shattered, and flaming alcohol sprayed everywhere, engulfing the goblins operating the ram in a wave of fire. They scattered, screaming. A cheer went up from the walls. "Again," Luke yelled, handing her another. She shot again, this time aiming for a pile of siege equipment. Another fireball erupted. Chaos spread through the goblin ranks. They were disorganized at the best of times, and fire was one of the few things they truly feared. Gnarl the war chief, enraged, urged his work forward. "Kill them. Kill the fire makers." Esra saw him coming. She took one last fire arrow, her eyes narrowed. "This one's for the cage," she whispered, and let it fly. The arrow struck true, hitting Gnarl square in the chest. The bottle exploded, and the goblin chief became a shrieking, running torch before collapsing into a smoldering heap. With their leader dead and their equipment burning, the goblin army's morale broke. They turned and fled, scrambling back towards the jungle in a disorderly rout. The courtyard erupted in a roar of victory. Soldiers clapped Luke and Esra on the back, cheering their names. They had done it. They had saved the castle. Chapter 8. A shy boy's courage. Later, in the great hall, surrounded by the celebrating court, Luke felt more out of place than ever. He was clean, wearing borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, and everyone was staring at him. The king, a large, bearded man with Ezra's eyes, had officially thanked him and called him a hero, but all Luke could think about was the look on Ezra's face in the cave. He had frozen. He had hurt her. He saw her across the hall, talking with her father and some nobles. She looked every inch the princess again, radiant in a new gown. She was laughing, but her eyes kept drifting towards him, a hint of sadness in them. He couldn't do this. He couldn't let it end like this. The same courage that had faced down Mopes and goblin armies had to be found for this. He took a deep breath, marched right through the crowd, and stopped in front of her. The nobles fell silent, looking at this strange, shy boy in ill-fitting clothes. "Esra," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "Can I talk to you? Alone, please?" She looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course." He led her out onto a quiet balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. The sounds of the feast faded behind them. "Luke, what is it?" she asked, her tone cautious. He turned to face her, his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. He was blushing furiously, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. "Back in the cave," he began, his words tumbling out in a rush. "When you told me what you told me, and I said, I'm so sorry. It wasn't because I didn't feel the same way. It was because I felt it so much it scared me. I've never felt that way about anyone. I'm shy, and I'm not good with words, especially not big words like that." He took another shaky breath. "You are the most incredible person I have ever met. You're brave, and you're smart, and your sarcasm is the funniest thing I've ever heard, even when it's directed at me. You see things in me that I don't even see in myself. When I'm with you, I feel braver. I feel like I can be more than just the quiet guy in the corner." He finally said it. "I love you too, Esra." The silence that followed was the most terrifying moment of his life, worse than any goblin or cliff dash terror. Then, a slow, beautiful smile spread across Ezra's face. It reached her eyes, making them sparkle in the moonlight. "It took you long enough," she said softly, stepping closer. "I was beginning to think I'd have to have a goblin kidnap us again to get a proper conversation out of you." Luke let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "So we're okay?" "We're more than okay, you beautiful, shy, brave fool." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Now, for heaven's sake, kiss me before I die of old age." And so Luke Glanton, the 18-year-old introvert from another world, kissed the sarcastic Princess of Eldoria under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. It was awkward and a little clumsy, an absolutely perfect dot as they pulled away, both of them blushing and smiling. A thought occurred to Luke. "So what happens now?" he asked. Esra linked her arm with his, laying her head on his shoulder, a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "Now," she said, looking out at the peaceful gardens. "Now the story really begins. And I have a feeling it's going to be hilariously, horrifyingly, wonderfully epic." For the first time since he'd arrived in this strange, dangerous, magical world, Luke Glanton felt not like a lost tourist, but like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And he was no longer shy about it.